Welcome to the Noob's Guide to Brakes. There are two main types of brakes used on today's vehicles, being the drum brake and disc brake. Drum brakes are cheap to make, expensive to maintain, and subpar at stopping modern vehicles. I don't care if early Lamborghini Diablos had them, that doesn't mean they were good enough to be on a Lamborghini, it just meant that Chrysler was too cheap to put anything better. Drum brakes have been around for centuries on wagons, carriages, and they survived on many standard passenger cars. While their design initially protects them from the elements, they are woefully incapable of repeated exposure or intense usage. Like, for example, long periods of stop-and-go traffic, going down mountains, windy roads, autocrossing, tracking, or even just dailying high-performance vehicles. Another massive weakness is that if they do get mud, water, and other grime does manage to get past their design, it has a really hard time getting out, which makes them horrendous at stopping. This made them really just terrible all around. Really, the only cars that made sense to have them were just cars that had 50 horsepower, but as cars got faster and faster over time, it was just a ticking time bomb waiting to happen, so we just got rid of them in favor of their better successor, which is the disc brake. The only reason you'll find drum brakes on modern cars is due to economic reason for the manufacture. They're cheaper to produce but not to replace due to their strenuous labor costs. So basically, it's the manufacturers saving their own money at the cost of your money later, so don't feed their corporate greed, get a set of disc brakes once your drum brakes wear out. Fortunately, if you have one of those cars that have disc brakes on the front and drums in the rear, don't worry too much about the drums in the rear. The front does most of the stopping anyways. Just know that when your rears do ultimately need replacing, it's ironically cheaper these days to actually just get disc brakes for the rears as well. Like I said, there's no reason to defend these brakes. There are a lot of classic items that get cult followings like typewriters or candles, and this is because like with a typewriter you can feel it, with something like a candle you can smell it, you can hear the flame, and you can also feel the warmth. When it comes to drum brakes, nothing about them brings back good nostalgia. You can remember bad nostalgia, like yeah, I remember that time my grandfather couldn't stop his car in time when going down the mountain and completely crashed and died in a horrible fire on his way to his death. Yeah, good times, nostalgic, right? And let me explain to you why disc brakes are superior. They have very few components. They're not very complicated. The only thing they share in common with the drum brake is the master cylinder. From there on, they feature the rotor, the caliper, the pad. Those are the three main ones. And the pad, what I like about it is that it's the design that wears down the most. Whereas your rotor and calipers, those can actually last a very, very long time. Most people, it will last their entire ownership of the vehicle and the next guy who buys your car has to worry about it. The cool part about the pad is that no matter what car it is, it's a universal replacement. Same exact process. You punch out these pins, you take out this 13mm bolt, and boom, the calipers will split and reveal the pad. That is it. Labor costs for changing these are extremely cheap. This design was just cheaper. It was better at stopping cars. It was safer, and they were just better looking too, if that also counts for anything. The only thing that drum brake fans had left to worry about was, oh, well, this open-ended design, it's gonna be too overexposed to the elements. They were right, but quite the opposite happened due to that result. Because of how open and exposed to the elements they were, nothing could get trapped. So for example, water would just splash on it and then just splash right off of it. Mud can just splash onto it and then splash right off of it, and so on and so forth. This also made it where heat couldn't stick either. Heat dissipation was extremely, extremely favored on disc brakes due to their open design because wind can just blow right into them. And now that you know why these are just the ultimately superior design, let's spend the remaining bulk of this video breaking down the variations of disc brakes' available components. We'll start with different rotor types. First, we have material. Most brake rotors are either carbon ceramic, steel, or iron. Iron obviously rusts the most, but it's going to be the cheapest. Steel rotors are about balanced price, but carbon ceramics are the ones that are going to dissipate heat the best and weigh the lightest. So you'd probably think that everyone should just run carbon ceramics, right? Well, the car gods decided to release a patch to balance the usage of CCs by making them stupidly expensive. And by stupidly expensive, I really do mean stupidly expensive. Like, they don't just cost a ton. Make that 6 tons. Here, check out these carbon ceramic rotors, and now check out all these other things you could have bought. Moving along, when viewed along the side, we'll discuss vented versus standard. Standard rotors are, well, standard obviously, they just have a single plate design. Vented rotors on the other hand are just as they sound. They have a 2-plate design that allows air to vent through them, hence vented rotor. This optimizes heat dissipation, blah blah blah, they cost more, way more, yeah, okay, next one. And it's moving on to the side view, to the front view, and the face of the rotors. From here we have 3 choices: solid, slotted, and drilled. Solid rotors are the most prevalent, the cheapest to make, cheapest to replace, and just the best for daily driving. Thanks to their massive surface area, solid rotors offer the best initial bite without any squeaking. They also have the longest lifespan, as this massive surface area allows for nice even wear. Even if you do own a performance car, solid rotors are usually good enough even for spirited driving scenarios. It's not until you start to enter more intermediate level driving, like autocrossing or going down mountain runs. Let me tell you, when you start autocrossing for the first time, brake fade finally becomes extremely noticeable. And don't even get me started on mountain runs. Horsepower may have got me up the mountain faster, but with the help of gravity and better brakes, going back down the mountains, all I saw were taillights from passing Miata drivers. When it comes to repeated, intense usage, brake fade is very common and can be very scary for solid rotors. Ultimately, if you're looking to get the most out of your vehicles, solid rotors just won't do. And that's where slotted rotors come in. Slotted rotors feature slots on them that allow for better air to vent through, and thus improve heat dissipation. Slotted rotors strike the perfect balance between surface area and ventilation, as their initial bite is still great for daily driving and multiple weather conditions. They're slightly more expensive to replace, but nothing extraordinary. They most commonly are used on high-performance vehicles, like for example my C7 Z06. A notable downside is that they will squeak in cold weather, since the slotted holes allow for cold air to create occasional whistle sounds. Do note that if you live in a place filled with non-car people, you'll constantly have them tell you, "I think you need to change your brake pads." No, Jimbo, I don't. And don't even act like you know what brake pads even are, because if you did, you would have been able to look down and see the big, beautiful, thick red Carbotex that I just put on. Everyone always thinks that I'm some irresponsible kid driving around his dad's Corvette. Like hell I am. I take care of this car myself front to back. And unlike most of these people who don't even know a dang thing about cars, but somehow still have the audacity to tell me how to take care of my car, just freak. Anyways, onto drilled rotors. We now find ourselves in pure because race car bruh territory. Even if you live in really hot climates like Houston, Texas, at most you need slotted rotors for heat dissipation. The only time drilled rotors really find any use are from extreme long-term repeated usage, like straight up racing multiple laps on a track. Even for autocrossing or other intermediate situations, I would still just recommend slotted. Drilled rotors, they have the best heat dissipation thanks to all the multiple holes that allow for air to pass through at an insane rate. This comes with the noticeable sacrifice of having a very horrible initial bite since they don't have good surface area, and on top of that, incredibly short lifespan due to how high the chance of warping and cracking, and even if they don't warp and crack, they will wear unevenly due to just how many holes they have in them. And all these holes cause those warping and cracking because, again, there's just so much opportunity for the pads rubbing against the limited surface area to apply too much repeated pressure on one area, and boom, now you've got a crack. Do understand, this doesn't bother race car drivers because they change rotors mid-race. So if you're someone who plans on dailying a car and you just want drilled rotors for the clout, I don't recommend it. It's not worth it. Or if you just have a ton of money and you wake up one morning and are like, man, my wallet sure is heavy, then sure, go get drilled rotors for your daily. And if you thought that was all, well, we've only begun, because combination rotors are also a thing. Rotors that are carbon ceramic, slotted, drilled, vented, dipped, Gundam, Boomer, Tears, Puppy Blood, 8-piston, 10-gauge, Weeaboo loving, okay, you get the point. There exist rotors that combine all the elements of prior rotors to make the ultimate Chad rotor. For example, you can find a vented, slotted, drilled, carbon ceramic rotor that also has little creases in them, so yeah, what I said before, if your wallet is ever just really heavy, just know, these got your name written all over them. Unless you plan on building an insane time attack car, or drive a really high-end hypercar that breaks world records, you don't need these. And now that we've got rotors covered, congratulations, that was only one of the 3 parts that we'll be talking about. Moving on to brake pads, we'll start with material yet again. Brake pads also feature a plethora of material, being metal composite, copper, iron, steel, graphite, and some will add rubber, others will add ceramic, and some will be fully carbon or fully ceramic. Unlike with rotors, a point I'd like to note is that ceramic pads are not the bee's knees. Ceramic pads are by far the quietest, which makes them great for luxury cars, but their stopping distance is actually worse than carbon and standard counterparts. This makes them very niche. Another extremely good benefit they have that some people will temporarily swap to them for is that they don't make that much brake dust, and this is due to the ceramic structure that when it's rubbed against the friction of the rotor, doesn't make that much dust. I'll see a lot of show cars run ceramics the day of a car show, but whenever they go tracking or whenever they go dailying, they'll swap back to their Carbotex or whatever the heck. Moving on to standard pads, these are usually made from metal composites. These pads have a somewhat firm yet flexible feel, and they are the cheapest and most widely available pad. They stop adequately, wear evenly, but their biggest downside is that they make tons of brake dust. And this is due to the fact that you're practically grinding metal on metal. Carbon pads have the most versatile design. They're commonly called carbons due to the fact of graphite, which is a carbon material. The softer compounds are quiet and clean, like ceramic pads, but with better stopping power than them. Meanwhile, the harsher compounds are extremely good for racing, with nothing else being able to come close to competing against them. A softer compound like a Carbotech 1521 that I run, great for daily driving and spirited driving. A little bit of a middle ground like an AX6 will be great for autocrossing and performance street driving. And by the time you get really high up, like XP24, those straight up just say don't use for daily driving or public road use, because those higher end compounds are so harsh that they will reduce the lifespan of your rotors because of how heavy the grinding is. Usually it's the other way around, your rotors will outlive your pads, but if you're running really harsh carbons, you will go through pads and rotors at the same time. Do note that again, this is for track racers, this is for people who are professionally involved in the industry or very dedicated hobbyists. And you're probably going to ask, well, if carbons are better than other brakes, why doesn't everyone just use them? Well, same reason as before. And finally, on to the last major component in your brake setup, the calipers. Calipers are usually rated by the amount of pistons they have, with more pistons being associated with better stopping, and this is mostly due to the fact that more pistons mean more force and more room for a larger brake pad. A lot of modern cars will have more pistons in the front than rear. Again, the front has more responsibility, so it's cheaper to do this. 4 piston fronts and 2 piston rears are adequate for a lot of vehicles these days. It's only when you get to a performance vehicle do you really need 6 piston fronts and 4 piston rears, and by the time you get to really high-end supercars, they'll have 6 pistons all around. While 8 pistons do exist, they usually don't fit on wheels that are smaller than 20 inches, and they aren't actually as helpful as one would think, because they're mostly designed for stopping heavier vehicles, and when it comes to supercars and hypercars, they usually care about being as light as possible. And keep in mind that 8 pistons themselves also are rather weighty, so again, it becomes one of those moments where you have to think to yourself, is adding that much weight really necessary? As you can probably tell as the theme of this video, overkill does exist. Keep in mind that certain brake sizes can only be accommodated properly by fitting larger wheels. Larger rotors, larger pads, and 6 pistons tend to need more clearance, otherwise you risk your very spokes rubbing against your brakes. To learn more about wheels and everything about their benefits and differences, go check out my Noob's Guide to Wheels amongst many more Noob's Guide videos. Otherwise, that's going to be it for this video. If I sound a bit irritated, that's because this is the 4th time me trying to record this and I'm no longer in my current home in Indiana and I'm actually visiting Atlanta right now in a public area and it's really loud, blah blah blah. Point is, sorry about all the background noise if there is any. Anyways, see y'all next time. Blade Angel out.